As a science communication student, I've really come to appreciate the value of Indigenous Knowledge Systems, IKS, more so because one of the biggest problems that we face today is how misunderstood IKS are, especially
Indigenous knowledge in common terms refers to the practices, the tools that we normally use in the community, that we develop in the community in order to make sure that we actually get to live a better life, be in harmony with the environment.
It is also the responsibility of the media to ensure that the indigenous communities are represented well. So the media has a very important role in promoting indigenous knowledge systems, particularly by raising awareness on what indigenous communities are doing, the ways of life. So doing, the media can also assist indigenous communities to commercialize some of the cultural stories that actually emerge from these communities.
For example, when you look into, or rather look at the African traditional medicine, it is often dismissed or rather seen as inferior simply because it doesn't seem to fit neatly into the science empirical frameworks. And I believe this has created a lot of stigma.
Celebrating Heritage Day, Heritage Month, in the month of September, it's very important that we also acknowledge and embrace our Indigenous Knowledge Systems, commonly known as IKS, how important it is to our daily living, and also how important it does contribute to our education. So coming from the university background, we embrace IKS in all its forms and shapes. Very important that we have platforms where we embrace our community and IKS holders who have knowledge that has been passed on from generations to generations for many centuries, and we are still benefiting from them. And we also saw recently how IKS holders helped a lot of people during the pandemic, during COVID pandemic, and they continue to do so, helping many people for various ailments like HIV, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, and many diseases that people think we can only get help from the hospital or from using Western medicines. So it's very important that we embrace our IKS and we partner with them, especially institutions of learning that have capacity to research and also strengthen the IKS knowledge. So it's also important that we communicate this not just by writing articles or writing papers, but we also communicate this through various platforms, through initiatives like this where we do science communication campaigns, where we embrace and show what we do together working with IKS holders, and also how do we promote and preserve the IKS, because yes, we do have a lot of people that are currently IKS holders that are knowledgeable in many customs and many products that can be very helpful. But if we don't preserve that as institutions, we don't preserve that as communities, they will get lost 2 generations down the line. So it's very important that we modernize it, we promote it, and we make it fashionable, and understand that it is equally as important as Western research, if we might call it that way. There's a lot of value to be derived. There are a lot of benefits that can be derived, and also assist a lot of people.
And I think we need to realize as a society that science isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's shaped by context, the culture, the history, the environment. And Indigenous knowledge systems are an important part of that context. And that the IKS and the Western medicine should not be seen to be in competition as they.
The discourse in science communication, heritage, and Indigenous knowledge in South Africa reflects a multifaceted landscape, characterized by efforts to promote, preserve, and integrate Indigenous knowledge into different contemporary practices. Practices such as the decolonization of research, commercialization of Indigenous crops, our health sector, and many others. One very important contribution was made by the University of Limpopo, which was supported by DSI, in that they developed and introduced a PG dip in science communication. And one of its most important modules was science communication and contextualized knowledge. The main focus of this program was to empower young researchers, young science communicators, to know something about the heritage of the people in South Africa. If we want to communicate with people about science, it is so important that we know where they come from.
As we embrace the Heritage Month, I think it is a chance for us to challenge these misconceptions, to show that IKS, like the African traditional medicine, deserve a seat at the table in our scientific and medical discussions.
Modern global world where we have a lot of connection and a lot of linkages and a lot of communication between different cultures as well as between more modern society and some societies that are still living in a traditional way, there can seem to be a bit of a friction between beliefs and ways of living in a traditional way and then modern scientific methodologies. And in the past, it has seemed to be that science can sometimes be seen as overthrowing these traditional methods with something that is better and more modern. And I think that we are slowly realizing and quicker understanding that both these ways of gaining knowledge are equally important. And in the past, we used to call it validation, when you would take some knowledge that has been gained in a traditional setting and that is known by traditional healers, for example, and then validated it through means of the scientific method. I think that validation is perhaps maybe a misconception. Both those ways of learning are equally valid, and what they do is when you bring them together, they strengthen and can show that the information gained has different uses and a more broad scope. So in terms of what's happening with healers, when they explain that a certain plant is used in a certain way and for a particular medicinal reason, what science can do, or what the modern scientific method can do, is they can break that plant down, they can see what different chemicals are utilized, they can perform extracts and perform experiments that show that these extracts then limit bacterial growth or fungal growth or viruses, and then can see a little bit more the mechanism of how these medicines work. Often we find that healers will mix different plant species together, or they will use the whole plant, and so sometimes the way that they utilize the plant is in a way more holistic and sometimes has better effect than when you break the plant down and isolate the chemicals and use them one at a time. However, they both have equal importance, because perhaps through using and breaking down the chemicals used in a plant, you can find other medicinal properties and other ways of using that plant than what were originally used by the healers. However, you can also understand that maybe the reason a plant is not or a chemical is not operating as efficiently as with it when a healer uses it, that it might just be because it's not then a decoction, it's not the whole elixir of chemicals that the healer is using. So there's validity in both those ways of looking at things. I think the main and most important thing is to understand that plants can also be dangerous, and whether or not you're using the scientific method of extracting things, those things also have side effects. We all know that chemical pills have side effects, and equally with the medicinal or the traditional healers, often those plants are also very, very toxic, and if they're not utilized in a specific way, they can be absolutely dangerous to the patient. So if the healer does not have sufficient knowledge and is not correctly trained, then that is also very dangerous. Both these ways of utilizing plants are vital and important to us. Both of them have problems and need to be used carefully.
So intellectual property is a property that belongs to a person or to a community. So there is someone who owns that knowledge, who owns that idea. It started as an idea that actually was realized to produce something that is worthwhile. And remember that something could be a method, could be a practice, could be a tool. So that intellectual, and that is what constitutes an intellectual property. And that is very important in nowadays to protect it. You protect it so that you can benefit from it. Remember that when you develop this, it's something that will be taken to the public. You're not developing it so that you can use it privately. So when you take it to the public, there will be other people that may see what you use, the tool or the method that you do, and may want to actually emulate that. They may actually start also producing a similar or the same kind of tool, because it will be something that is produced using the resources that are there in the environment. So when that happens, when that imitation happens, where someone duplicates what you have done, then it's going to be very difficult to know where it comes from. And in current terms, because what works is actually something that can actually bring you money. We're talking about money nowadays. So if the person who duplicated the tool or the method or the practice, whatever it is, go out and claims that this, I am the author, I am the originator, I am the developer, I am the innovator, I'm the inventor of this, then you lose out, because this has not been documented. There is no reference to you as the person who has actually been the first person to initiate and develop that. So it is important that at the point of developing, that you actually go to protect it. And this is where now the protection of the intellectual property is important, of whatever you develop. And anything can be developed, anything, even from the idea. You protect the idea, you protect your creation, because it is your mind that protected it. And the purpose, really the importance at the base of it, of protecting indigenous knowledge, is to make sure that it actually benefits the community where it comes from. There are elements, there are tools, there are resources that actually are found only in one area. There are those that actually belong to one community or even one country. So by location, then the community where that resides, if someone outside the community comes and benefit from the resources that come from your community, should actually be able to give benefits to that community where they have collected the resources to use for commercialization. So that is very important. So this goes also to an individual. So, but when we talk about indigenous knowledge, because indigenous knowledge in most cases is communal, it belongs to the society. It does not in most cases belong to one person. And it is actually protected under different laws, like sui generis, different set of laws that actually recognize indigenous knowledge. And in most cases, because this is mostly by word of mouth, it's not really recorded and documented. So, but it is known. You can track it back by actually talking to the people in the community. So that is very important, and those laws will protect the indigenous knowledge of a particular community. So if I do come into that community and I ask them how they produce, I may give an example of how they produce maybe a traditional beer, and I go and make money out of it. I produce and put it on the shelf on the market, and I make money out of it. I must give benefit to that community, because that knowledge on how to produce it, belongs to that community. Remember that you may not protect natural resources, you may not protect the cereals, you may not protect the plant. That belongs to everyone, it is in nature. So, but the method of how to utilize it is what is being protected. And that is very important, that now this is where now the protection, even though it will be known within that community, is information that is in the public, but because it comes from one community, this is where now we need to protect them so that any commercial benefits that is reaped out of it can actually be plowed back to that community, and the community can actually benefit. And this is where now in current trends that we try to valorize, to make sure that we document, we record indigenous knowledge, and we try different ways to valorize it, not to validate, because that does work. So there's no need to validate. So, but you valorize, you see value, you actually produce scientific data, scientific records of how things work, how that method, because in the communities, when they use the practices, the methods, it's more of an art. They know the art of producing the beer. They know the ingredients, how much you need to add, and you put it under this set of conditions, and this is what the product you will get. So, but that is more of an art. So nowadays, even as the scientists will go now to learn the methods, to understand the method from a scientific perspective, so that we can be able to record it, because recording is important for history, for our records, for archiving is very important. So now to actually learn to understand the science, because the science is the same, it does not belong to a particular knowledge system. So recording, understanding what is there, this is what will actually be used to valorize and to make sure that you can actually take that indigenous knowledge, which is in most cases regarded as, because it is not documented, it is carried by word of mouth, it's taken as inferior. So, but to put it to the same level as the Western knowledge, which is actually documented. So this is what now we do to make sure that when you put anything on the market, because you can only gain from the market from commercialization if you can tell your potential consumer what this is, what it contains, how it will make sure that it heals. If it is traditional medicine, this is what it contains and this is what it will give. And this will be the outputs, this will be the side effects if they are there. So, and this is where it comes in terms of valorization, in making sure that we actually document and we produce scientific data. So the commercialization will lead to beneficiation and making sure that knowledge is not lost. Because if it is lived on by word of mouth, there is a possibility that it may be lost, because the modern generation may be working differently. So, but by documenting it, by valorizing it, then it is kept in the archives, and the country, the community will be able to benefit from it forever.
Science meet heritage, and science meet indigenous knowledge around indigenous knowledge systems. We hope you enjoy. We hope you find this information helpful and useful, and happy science communications.